He will come not from the south, nor the east. Our mercenaries in the north report that he has forged an alliance with the tribes of the Po Valley. He intends to circumnavigate Massalia and march his army...
Over the Alps, perhaps! He would lose half his army from attrition alone. The other half would desert.
We must defend the mountain passes.
Do you expect the Gauls to welcome him when he arrives? I suppose he will bring with him an army of elephants!
Senators, I dare say that would be quite a feat, even for the great Hannibal Barca.
Hey, what's up guys? This is Oakley and we're going behind the scenes for Rome 2's Hannibal trailer. So we're here in the Alps and I'm basically going to be retracing some of the steps of Hannibal, trying to bring you guys the historical context and what it would have been like in real life. So I would refer you to the video below, and that's going to talk about sort of what leads up to the Punic Wars and especially the Second Punic War. So take a look at that for the historical context. We're going to be talking a bit more about Hannibal's travels. So we're going to start off in the spring of 218 BC. Hannibal is going to be leaving his base in New Carthage. That's going to be in Spain, and he's going to be heading out essentially with 50,000 foot and 12,000 horse. Heading north, he's crossing the Pyrenees, and he's recruiting more and more Iberians and different tribes to come to his cause. He's setting up his supply line and all that, making for his ambitious journey to the Alps. Now what he's going to do is he's going to drop off troops along the way to secure his supply lines, to secure his gains, and he's going to have to defend Spain as he's in Italy. So he's going to leave troops behind. So what he's going to do is keep marching to the northeast. Now the Romans are going to be deploying a force led by Scipio, and he's going to be in Massilia. So they're going to be crossing basically right at Massilia, the south of the Alps. They're going to be blocking that passage. And so what Hannibal is going to be forced to do is travel north and go up. And when he travels across the River Rhone, which is basically to the north of Massilia, when he crosses that, he's left with around 40,000 foot and 8,000 cavalry. And then he's going to head into the Alps with those forces. Going through the Alps, Hannibal would have had a motley set of crew members for his army. He would have had some native Carthaginians, but the predominant majority of the force would have been recruited mercenaries. So, of course, traveling into the Alps, Hannibal would not have known where to go. So he recruited a lot of the local tribesmen to join his cause for plunder. Now, going into the Alps, he wouldn't know where to go. So he sent out many deputations with gifts, basically trying to attract the attention of the tribesmen that were in the Alps to try and secure scouts, to try and secure a safe passage through the territories. You can see here the terrain would have been pretty hard going, so many of the tribes were overawed by Hannibal's force moving through and decided to join him, and the fact that Hannibal had 37 elephants at the time did much to scare the tribes into helping him. But for those who decided to resist, and for those who saw this slow-moving column of troops, it was a tempting target. So what you would have seen is the pastoral people in this area, where in the summer they would tend to their animals, in the winter move them into these walled forts, but they would, be hiding in the cliffs, and they would basically be shadowing Hannibal's forces as they moved on. Now the tribes who chose to resist Hannibal would have known the terrain much better than Hannibal and his scouts. So what they would have done is, you can see here kind of the debris field, they would have toppled rocks basically to block passages to Hannibal, slow down his troops, and some of these rocks would have even crushed or at least hampered Hannibal's troops. Another thing you would have seen is, you see this countryside here, as Hannibal was moving through, he would have stuck to the low ground, which would have been easier. And so what you would have seen is the tribesmen basically positioning themselves on top and attacking Hannibal from the higher Alps, striking when the forest made cover for them. So what you would have seen is Hannibal deploying forces, scouts and screening troops above, way higher in the peaks, basically to flush out these invaders. As Hannibal made his way through the Alps, one particular tribe pretended to be his scouts, and they said they would secure his way through a particular pass in the mountains. Now Hannibal grew wary of them. He knew that they were up to nothing. Some of the scouts would go back to the tribes and talk to them, and then come back to Hannibal's convoy as they're moving slowly. And this particular passage was very narrow, and it would be hard going. Few of Hannibal's troops could fit through, and many of his supply caravans and his pack animals were having a hard time. So as Hannibal entered the pass, he knew that it would be essentially a battle, and he formed up his troops. Many of them were, however, caught by surprise when the barbarians fled from either side, toppled rocks, threw down their arrows, their spears, all of that, and they would basically chase off some of his pack animals. Hannibal's troops were in disarray, but Hannibal led his core veterans, his troops from Spain, and they rescued them. Now, in retaliation for this event, this treachery, what he went on to do was to find those villages of those tribes that had betrayed him, and he went and burned them down. Hannibal was then able to continue his voyage. But Hannibal's main problem would have been the cold. The snow and ice that would have blocked his path would have been a huge, huge danger to his men. Now, if we were to believe the accounts of the historians such as Livy, who basically say that Hannibal would have lost half of his men crossing the Alps, this would have been a very, very harrowing journey, and that's why the Romans were caught by surprise when Hannibal passed through. Now, according to the accounts of the historians, we don't actually know which path that Hannibal took to cross the Alps. Even contemporary historians, those who could have, for example, Polybius, who would have basically been able to talk to the veterans, the survivors of the Romans who fought at Cannae, he talked to those people and he went to try and retrace the steps of Hannibal, but no one really knows which route he took, so it's still one of the great mysteries of history. But in any case, Hannibal did cross the Alps and he lost many of his men, but he had made it into Italy and was entering the Po Valley. Once he crossed the Alps, Hannibal had time to rest his troops and recruit more from the native Gauls in the area, the other people in the Po Valley who were recently subdued by the Romans but were very discontent with the rule of the Romans. So he rested for a while in the Po Valley, rallying his forces, and what he needed was a victory. So he sent out his men, and the Romans were not quite yet ready. So what Publius Cornelius Scipio did is he sent out a scouting force with a couple thousand cavalry and velites as support. And he bumped into Hannibal's more experienced cavalry that were led by Massinissa. So Massinissa was actually one of the Numidian cavalrymen, and he would prove to be very crucial in the war, first serving under Hannibal and then later turning against him and serving for a later Scipio Africanus. And it was said that they would, that Massinissa leader would later become a king of his people, and he would actually ride into battle late into his 70s, and he was father to a prolific number of children, and he was a great warrior. So in any case, his Numidian cavalry routed the Romans, and in the process, Publius Cornelius Scipio almost lost his life. He was injured, his cavalrymen were fleeing, and they were going to leave him behind. So what his son did, and that was Publius Scipio, who would later become Scipio Africanus, decided to single-handedly charge the enemy, and seeing that his companions rallied around him, and they charged, and they were able to save his father during that battle. So in any case, it was basically just a skirmish in which the Carthaginians won, and it was more of a symbolic victory against the Romans to show that this force would hold its own against the Romans. And this was the big rallying cry that led a lot of the Gauls to come to Hannibal's side. And then after that, of course, you have the battles of Trebia, of Lake Trasimene, and of course Cannae. And Hannibal would go on to stay in Italy for the next 15 years. And that's where I'm going to leave you guys.